Now let's make some summaries of the table by using a tool called pivottable. For that, let's click inside the table and do an insert pivottable, and it selects correctly the table, and we want to create it in a new worksheet, so no changes here, just an OK. And here it is. This is the pivottable. Let's go ahead and click on the right pane. Let's click on the city. It displays all the cities in which the sales were made in our table. And now let's click on the total, which means that now it shows the sums of all sale revenues for those cities. As we see, the biggest sales number of dollars were acquired from Tallinn, and all the different cities are summarized herein. Actually, when we click outside the pivot table, this right-hand pane disappears, so we have to be inside. And now we're actually going to be doing a lot of pivot tables. All the time we go back to that original sheet and give the command insert pivot table and OK. Now the second pivot table is when we click on brand and total, and as we see, the biggest sales are made with Frodo, with brand called Frodo, and also down here on the right-hand lower pane, we see that brand has been selected and sum of total has been selected. So this is actually the portion of pivot that controls the pivot table. And we can double click on this 146,000, that is the sale of Frodo, and we get a new sheet with all the sales of Frodo. So we can drill down into details. There are different counts on which the sales have been made, different dates and so forth, different cities. We next go back to pivot table, create a new one, and we want to next see the dates in which the sales were made. We do date, and we can click on count now, because we want to know the sum of count for each date, which means that how many computers were sold on different dates. The leading number is 11 on 7th of January. There are some dates on which only one computer was sold. Now, sometimes we don't want to see the sum. We want to see the average of the numbers sold on that specific day. So we can right-click on sum of count and click on something called value field settings. And then instead of sum, we select average. Actually, many things are hidden inside the menus of pivot table. Excel formulas are easier in a sense because they are displaying everything out in the open. But here we have to drill down. And as we see, on 7th, there were really many sales that were made. The average is only 2,75, whereas we can switch back to sum. Whereas on 9th there was only one sale, and during that sale 6 were sold. So average is the same as sum. Okay, it seems that we need to format this table a little, so we select the numbers and do a control 1 number and 2 decimal places. Check whether there are 2 decimal places so it looks nicer. And the grand total here shows the average over all the sales. How many were sold on average when we do this arithmetics over all the sales, which is 2,71. Now, the next thing we would like to see is another pivot table. Let's create it. Let's click on brand, and then both on count and total. So this way, it actually puts brand on rows down on the right side here, but two things on values. We're yet to see a more complicated pivot table, which puts something on rows, something on columns, and something on values. Right now, two things are on values: the counts and the totals. And what we can summarize from here is that, remember the two leading computers as far as sales were concerned. Frodo was the leading one. We looked deeply into that as well. But Balrog is the second one as far as revenue is concerned. And we can see that Frodo achieved its 146,000 with 11 computers, whereas Balrog got almost 1/3 less with 25 computers. So what remains here to be concluded is that Frodo is some kind of a high-end computer. Let's check its price. Yes, it's 13,000 is its price, whereas Balrog is some kind of a commodity with price of 4,100. Now, let's make another pivot table and create a really proper pivot table, because we want to now put something on rows and something on columns. Let's click on city, and then let's click on brand, and then let's click on total. This is the first time when pivot table has not been constructed correctly. Namely, we see that here on rows we have both city and brand. So it's like Pärnu, all brands, Tallinn, all brands, and so forth. And then in the middle, where the data is summarized, that shows the total. So what we want to do now is take this city and drag it to columns. Click and drag it to columns. And here it is. Now we have a two-dimensional pivot table, which is what it usually is actually. And we have, for instance, here Frodo, Tallinn, 79,800. So where the rows and columns cross, we have the sale for that brand and that market. In the end of the row Frodo, we have the total for Frodo sales. In the end of the column Tallinn, we have the total for Tallinn sales. So Frodo is still 146,000, and Tallinn is still leading with 269,000. And of course there's this grand total, which sums up all the sales in all the regions. And we still can click on individual numbers and get the table that forms these numbers. In a pivot table, the table is really not dynamically, so to say, connected with the data. So, in other words, if we go and change anything any place, we have to right click and do refresh. Otherwise, the numbers are not really reflecting the reality.